I will freely admit that this bit of D&D advice that I'm about to bestow upon you was partially inspired by numerous pieces of WotC art. Specifically the scenes of people walking around in public areas in various cities. That made me think of the most memorable scenes from my long and illustrious gaming career and what made them special. The key is simplicity. In other words, don't add every single race to all your scenes. That's unrealistic, unimaginative, and even worse, boring. If you do it once, it tells your players that they're in a highly diverse metropolis where everybody peacefully mingles and later gets together for a group hug. If you do it again, what made the first city special is lost. If you want to world build properly and make locations interesting for your players, segregate the NPCs. Save the cantina scenes for when you need to impress them. The more you dip into the same well, the shallower it becomes. If you like this video and channel, please like and subscribe. I'm not a fan of asking people to do that, but YouTube's pretty adamant about it. Then get your friends to subscribe. You can help them by borrowing their phone and hitting that button for them. And when you're in other people's houses, just go online real quick, ask to borrow their computer, and of course, subscribe. Then you can unsubscribe from all their other favorited channels because they don't need that now that they've got me. Anyways, back to the video. A lot of gamers call the images of the taverns where almost every playable race is represented somewhere the Mos Eisley Cantina Effect. They've become quite common in D&D art lately, to the point of every festival, tavern, or street scene is going to have a minimum of 6 different races represented. But the people putting out all this art have lost what makes the iconic Cantina scene famous, or at least the people commissioning the art. In Star Wars, until we got to that scene, Lucas had only shown 2 alien races until that point. He had shown you Jawas and Sand People. Both races didn't even show their faces. Then Luke and Ben walk through that door, and 37 alien species are suddenly hanging around. I counted. Well, Cantina Customs did, I just cribbed his notes. You go from 2 alien races to over 3 dozen. There were no aliens other than Jawas in the background, starting when Luke and Ben arrived until they walked into the cantina. I also checked that. And I'm not even including Chewbacca in that count. The point is, the scene is memorable because it completely changed the mood of the adventure. Aliens went from just a couple to dozens in the space of a single scene. That magic would be lost if they did it again when they went to the next location. To make your nations and cities memorable, keep the number of races in them to a bare minimum. It's easier to design cultures if a race dominates the region and everybody else is just a visitor. There can be enclaves of different races in the cities, but you need a reason why a large group from a different area decided to get up and move to a new nation. Was there a war in the other countries? Are they moving to a more prosperous nation trying to make money in a wealthier region? Or is there an empire involved in this, and the people are moving to the heart of the nation? Or did the empire move populations around in the past? Keeping the smaller cities, especially the inland ones, primarily a single race in terms of population, makes for far better immersion than if all of them are multi-ethnic to a ludicrous degree. You don't want to add random races in the background for aesthetics. They need a reason to be there. Diversity and tokenism differ in whether inclusion is mandatory rather than story-driven. This makes world building so much easier, and immersion for the players comes almost naturally. This isn't to say that you can't have multiple races found in your nation, but one of them will be dominant, and the other races will often become enclaves. Effectively an entire different nation within the one that you are working on. You fill out the culture with its own language, some unique customs designed just for them, a local religion or 3, add the government, and you're done. You can make it almost into a checklist. Now do this 50 more times and you've practically got yourself a campaign setting. Create subcultures by twisting your core culture slightly, usually based on populations located around specific geographic features. People living on the coast will have somewhat different mannerisms than hinterland farmers. City folks living in the largest town will differ in opinion from those in small, isolated communities. You get the idea. This isn't to say you can't have a large, diverse ethnic population with every race, but those places will be rare, and you need a reason why races from all sorts of climates, histories, and beliefs are flocking to a single area. Halflings like their small farms. Dwarves are too stubborn to leave their mountains. Elves have to thoroughly and ritualistically scrub themselves clean after touching another race. And it's your job to explain why they have put aside all their biases to live side by side. This makes the cantina scenes a bit jarring, as they're hard to justify. You can have all the patrons being adventurers or otherwise individualists, but just like telling your boss your mom died, that trick only works once. I'm just saying that overusing a plot element cheapens your story. Also, invest in hand sanitizers in cities with large elven populations. 2 D&D worlds showcase how to run a largely segregated world and a kitchen sink setting. I'm talking about the older versions of the settings, of course. Wizards D&D has a fixation on kitchen sink settings because they make for lively art, but they don't seem to understand how the settings work. These 2 worlds are the human-focused classic Ravenloft and the menagerie that is Planescape. Greyhawk and Mystara are primarily human-focused, but Ravenloft has a reason for the lack of other races. Spelljammer has a good reason to have lots of races, but that's only because of its naval theme. Planescape showcases how chaotic a town with almost every playable race living side by side would be. First up is Ravenloft, which is mainly human because of its themes of isolation and paranoia. The Mists have grabbed up mostly human lands because almost all the Dark Lords are or were human. As a rule, the locals don't trust anyone from a different land. If the visitor isn't human, the whispers behind their back get louder and more common. Non-human races have to live in enclaves because they're not welcome in any nation. Even the Vistani, who are widespread in the Mists, are shunned, as they are considered foreigners, even if they're in a land they grew up in. Ravenloft makes it a point of keeping most of the population human, though each domain typically has its own language and the human ethnicities present vary wildly. The populations of the domains become increasingly unwelcome the more you differ from them. Most of the non-humans found in Ravenloft are typically hostile to humans, viewing them as prey as a rule. The lack of diversity is the driving theme of the Domains of Dread. Changing that lessens the story elements. On the other hand, Planescape is found at the center of the multiverse, with gates to almost every world in D&D. Sorry, Athos, no easy escape for you, according to the lore. Sigal's population of several million is almost evenly broken down by all possible races, with humans and extraplanar denizens practically equal in number. However, no race has anything near a majority. Because the city is populated by so many different races from innumerable locations, you can put their enclaves almost anywhere in the city, and it will make sense. The diversity found in the cage is mind-blowing. Nobody's going to stare at a particular obscure creature because it's just another unique being, like the last one they saw an hour ago. Every tap house outside the enclaves is going to be filled with all sorts of creatures, to the point that the characters will be numb to the Cantina Effect, even at their lowest levels. That's the benefit of playing in a single city, though traveling to other places needs to keep up with the limited range of races, as this can cause profound culture shock for the people accustomed to the pure chaos of Sigal. Cities will always have individuals that stand unique compared to the local populations. Look at Thorin Oakenshield working as a smith in a human town as a classic example. Having something unusual doing a mundane task is a classic story twist, but it has limited uses before you wear out what makes it unique. If you go on a pub crawl in Runa at one of its many taverns, and the 17th pub has a puka tending bar, that's going to raise a lot of questions. But it only works once unless it becomes a theme for your campaign, because the players will start to expect the unexpected if you overuse it. As a guideline, only introduce one unique character in a local region per game, but feel free to reuse previous standouts, of course. Players love returning characters, even if it's just because they want to kill them. I know what you're saying, and after the poll suggestions, I think I'm going to retcon the Savage Coast again for my book by transforming the region into an area with a gold rush, with the red steel being the mineral. Of course, the mining and refining makes for toxic downside, so you still need your Cinebril. I know what you're saying now, and yes, this makes for a much easier way to nation build without having to explain the presence of each and every race in a single region. High diverse areas should be quite rare compared to single race dominated nations. Don't forget the grievances. There are many areas where certain races will get a hostile response from the locals because of these. Gnolls are hunted in Karamikos. Drow aren't particularly welcome in most parts of the Forgotten Realms because of all the wars, torture, and murder they might have committed. Unless Wizards is writing them. Fortunately, they color-coded the new Drow by making them purple. And like the new beetle-looking Klingons from Star Trek Discovery, you can easily replace them with far more interesting coal-black Drow. It's wise not to play any reptilian races in Krynn, and elves aren't exactly greeted with a smile in the Principality of Ulic, after they didn't help in the Greyhawk Wars. These rivalries and prejudices add to your nation's histories. Utopias, where everybody holds hands while dancing around a bonfire singing Happy Happy Joy Joy, are boring. You need tension to improve your storytelling. Even the pastoral Shire had the Saxville Baggins. The reason to keep the population of your nations largely homogeneous is that it makes it easy to build your nations. You don't have to explain why the population is so diverse. You just give them a shared history. This gives you a unique language that separates them from other nations and makes it easy to identify them in the grand scheme of things. If every nation supports all races, you lessen the cultural identity of them. But that raises the question, what do you want to do to shape the creation of the characters more, their upbringing or their identity? That's nature versus nurture, which is something D&D struggles with today. When we tied stat bonuses to the race, fighters tend to be hardier races like dwarves and Jotwa or Germans. Now that they've assigned stat bonuses to your upbringing, fighters are far more likely to be farmers or soldiers because that gives them the stat bonus to strength and constitution. Nobles don't get a constitution bonus, so they get fewer fighters. This leads to a disproportionate number of warriors coming from Kansas, but players will always chase the best benefits, and people will complain about it on various social sites. The solution, of course, is to get rid of ability score increases at level 1, but no version is going to do that except BECMI, which explains why it's the best edition of D&D. It's willing to make the hard choices that might be unpopular with the players, but is best for the game overall. Okay, back on topic. One aspect that people don't embrace as much is restricting certain subclasses, prestige classes, or similar to specific nations or races. The Mystara Player's Guide does this spectacularly by having region-based options. Do this with all the more exotic subclasses to make your settings memorable. Arcane archers might come from a specific academy because that's where the guy who discovered how to do all that magic bow stuff came from. It's not taught anywhere else. So if you want to be one, you have to have a background tying you to that nation and academy. And the school is rarely taught to outsiders, if at all. Monks must come from specific monasteries that teach their chosen style. Ditto with bards in particular schools. If you want to play a glamour bard, you better be Belgian. You can tie paladin variants to certain religions. Think of it as national units from the Civilization games. One of your nations gets Echo Knights, and the rival nations develop Rune Knights to counter. It gives a history to a class, as well as a country. Nation building can be complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. Things that look amazing in art can be a nightmare to explain in game. Keep the wildly diverse areas to a minimum, and more importantly, give them a reason to be a melting pot of cultures and races. Remember, racial animosity is a thing. Evil races walking around a city are more than likely going to be raising eyebrows and crossbows. Keep your nations racially segregated for ease of creation, and then when they need the help of elves, they're going to have to journey to Elfland where the pointy-eared folk live. Remember to bring hand sanitizer. And I hope nobody's playing a dwarf. Just remember, none of this applies to the party itself. They can make themselves whatever they'd like. Just remember, some of them might not be welcome in certain areas. Hopefully that bit of game wisdom that I've been accumulating for over 35 years helps. Until next time, remember, droids aren't allowed in here.